is Byzantine art. It's fairly small, but I thought that I could show you how I take notes, so that if you have a professor in college who is speaking a little more quickly than you would like, my son's way of solving that problem was to buy yet another piece of tech, which was a, pen that also recorded, and then you could, I still don't understand how it works, but it seemed to help. And anytime he had his hands on tech, he was excited. So we're going to look at Byzantine art. So if I had a notebook in front of me, which all of you please have one, the first thing I would do is, depending on how organized I was, which being an art student I wasn't, but I also did really well in history and that sort of thing. So the first thing I might do is put the date. I might even put the class, although hopefully just looking at your notes, the content would be really clear. So the first thing I would put down would be Byzantine art. Because when you're taking notes during a lecture time, you don't always have the luxury of, asking the teacher, could you say that again? Especially if you, say, end up at UC Berkeley and there are 400 or 500 people in the class. The professor's going to look at you and laugh. The other thing you need to understand about college courses is that most of those professors have not been taught to teach. Some of them are good teachers because they're just naturally good, but a lot of times they're not. And they're going to lecture the whole time, and they're not going to have any various learning activities and all that other good stuff. And so being able to put down pertinent information quickly is a really important skill. Now, a lot of you probably already have your way of taking notes. However, I thought it would be a good idea to go over this. So Byzantine art. So we're going to look at iconography. So let's look at the first slide. And we've got these pertinent questions, which actually should go at the end of the one. But how does medieval Christian art express and inspire devotion to God? So I might go ahead and just say how devotion is expressed. So then the next thing I would write, and the next one I might put architecture. How art enhances. So I'm not writing down every single word. I'm just kind of putting the main points. And, sometimes I'll go ahead and put these on my piece of paper, give myself 3 or 4 lines, then put this down in, another spot, because I figure I'll be writing some more stuff underneath that. But, my notes are not tidy and neat. I might, once the professor starts talking about it, draw a line and put an arrow and then write down how is devotion expressed down here. So that's kind of how I start with my notes. So then moving on to icons. In Byzantine art, icons are extremely important. And we are used to calling icons, something like a logo or something that's meaningful. So basically, the technical definition as it relates to Byzantine art is a painting of Jesus Christ or other holy figures, typically in a traditional style on wood, venerated and used as an aid to devotion in Byzantine and other Eastern churches. So that one I might just, depending on how rapidly the professor's teaching, I might put down religious, devotional art. And I might put an abbreviation for Byzantine next to it. And then put wood and then possibly paint. Because, this definition says a painting of Jesus Christ, but there are many icons of other holy figures. So to me, it's, religious devotional art. That, if I write that down, when I go back and look at my notes, I'll be able to say, we're referring to all of these pictures of saints that the Byzantines like to paint. And I've got a good friend who is an Orthodox Christian, and so they have icons all over their house, and they're still being painted today, very much in the stylized way that you see here. This is a very unusual ceramic icon, and then this one is wood. So icons were very important to Byzantine culture and Christian art in the Byzantine Empire. So, excuse me, am I going too fast, or is everybody good with this? Okay, so then we look at something that's really important to know the term for: iconoclasm. It's an action of attacking or assertively rejecting cherished beliefs and institutions or established values and practices. So that's a kind of a generic one. You know, if you're poking fun at some things that are really cherished beliefs. But the more specific one, well, we go to the next one: the rejection or destruction of religious images as heretical, the doctrine of iconoclasts. You're going to find that we've already studied a religion that doesn't show any living thing. What religion is that? Islam. So they are considered to be iconoclasts. And so that's good to, you know, kind of tie that little bit of information in there somewhere. And Buddhism also has an iconoclast sort of movement. And so sometimes on stupas, at least in the beginning, they didn't have any images of Buddha or anything like that. Later on, they did, as the Byzantines, and pretty much were able to triumph over iconoclasm. So this is the specific one that refers to the Byzantine Empire. It refers to two periods in the history of the Byzantine Empire when the use of religious images or icons was opposed by religious and imperial authorities within the Eastern Church and the temporal imperial hierarchy. So I would write that down by, of course, first putting iconoclasm. And then I may put, you know, against, because in the context of what we're talking about, so they're basically against images. So that's the specific one that we need to know, you know, and you can put living in there. And then you can underneath put Byzantine, Muslim, and Buddhist if you want to. So what happens is my notes are pretty messy when I am done with a class and I leave them. So when I'm studying, I go ahead and rewrite them. And if I don't remember certain information from my notes, then I you know, go to resources to see if I can find that. Because what happens is that when you're writing something down, even if it's only a couple of words, it actually goes into your brain and you look at that and you say, okay, I remember what this is all about. You know, so it's not a matter of writing every single thing down. You guys have an excellent resource in the fact that these are always posted on Classroom. There is also my riveting, exciting, and delightful lectures that are, you know, also posted. The videos are also posted. So, you know, sometimes you can't catch everything in a class. And I really sat down and thought a lot about what you had said, Charlotte, because I wanted to make sure you guys understood that sometimes you can't write everything down. So if your note-taking is very lengthy and very meticulous, that's great, but you'll be so busy filling and fleshing that out that you'll miss the next step, you know, that the teacher's going into. So far better to develop a little bit of a shorthand and abbreviation style for yourself, that then if at a later date you didn't get that down, you can ask somebody else and say, in your notes, what did you put down for this? Or you have Classroom to go ahead and refer back to. So this is a college level class, and you will, if you pass the test, you will get college credit for this. So the expectation that this is going to be, you know, just a regular high school class, you know, that's not a good expectation. So one of the cool things about doing this is that you do have a teacher that really cares and really wants you to learn this stuff, and will do everything I can to help you learn this stuff so you can do well on the test. But it's also a good opportunity to start, you know, developing, you know, good note-taking skills. And, you know, there are other teachers that are probably far better at teaching you those, but I just kind of showed you my system, which, you know, got me pretty darn good grades both in high school and college, as well as graduate school. So hopefully everybody has gotten what iconoclasm is. So now we're just going to go ahead and continue on. There's only a few more slides on this. So first of all, Theotokos. You know, if I were making notes, I would put this down and I would go ahead and write that it actually means either the mother of God, and it was used in Eastern Christianity. That is a Greek word. There is also the usual Latin translations, Dia Genitrix or Dia Cara. And so this is one of our works that we need to know. So the Virgin is often referred to as Theotokos, a child between Saints Theodore and George, 6th or early 7th century, encaustic on wood, and it's actually at St. Catherine's Monastery, Sinai, Egypt, where it was actually painted. It doesn't really say unless somebody's looked this up and have discovered that. But what you will see, it was done 6th or 7th century, so that's pretty early, say, compared to when we look at the Hagia Sophia and some other things. And so you're going to notice that there is still some classical Roman methods that are, you can see on this, that normally you would not see on a very stylized. So here we've got a couple of examples. So modeling in art has a number of different definitions, but the one specifically that we're talking about here is the technique of rendering and the illusion of volume on a two-dimensional surface by shading. So that has to do with value, and all of you, if you've taken Art 1, understand that value is dark to light, and that you can create the feeling of 3 dimensions on a two-dimensional surface when you change the lightness or the darkness. And so you can really see that here in the neck area. If somebody wants to hit the lights now that I'm kind of done with my little note-taking skill, let's go ahead and get someone to read this. Connor, go ahead and read this one. The painter.
The painter selectively uses the classicalizing style inherited from Rome. The faces are modeled. We see the same convincing modeling in the heads of the angels. Note the muscles of the necks, and the ease with which the heads turn almost 3/4.
Yeah, so here we've got the angels. So let's go back and look at the full painting again, and you can see that there's an angel on behind, you know, Mary on either side, and you can definitely see a lot of modeling and the understanding of anatomy. And so this is one of your required works, and it is encaustic. Anybody remember what encaustic is? Claire, what's encaustic?
I don't know.
Okay. Yes, Emma.
Is it encaustic or they use like wax to carry it?
Yeah, so the carrier, we talked a little bit about paint, how paint is pigment that's carried by a number of different things. And wax is what is used. And there are people who still do encaustic. I looked into doing it in painting class, but it involves using very hot wax. And I was a little concerned about particularly freshman and sophomore students getting burnt. Yes?
Have you ever done with hot plates and crayons?
You know, and that would be an interesting thing to
Because we did that in like grade school, because if you just get hot plates for like warming plates, and then you put the paper over and use the crayons, and as you draw it just melts.
Yeah, that would be cool. Okay, so we have looked at this first Theotokos. So let's look at the second one that you need to know. This one is actually an image that's attached to the Hagia Sophia. So is anybody in this class doing the Hagia Sophia? I think I may have given it to one of the really good online. Do you have it? Okay. At any rate, there are several images that are attached to that architectural site. And so if you got that, you just got one piece, but that means you need to write 2 full pages about it because you have 2 different images. You have this image, and then there's another one that's coming up next. So let's go ahead and get somebody to read this. Lauren, if you could read this for me, please.
Another Theotokos, this one a mosaic from the Hagia Sophia. The face of the apse silver dome that had an inscription commemorating the restoration of religious images after the defeat of iconoclasm. The full text said, the images which the impostors had cast down here, pious emperors have again set.
Okay, so I'm suspecting that there's several reasons why they put this up. One is because it is part of the Hagia Sophia, and they had some beautiful murals in there. But the second reason is that this was put up after the iconoclastic, crises that they dealt with. What is interesting, though, is that a lot of these images were plastered over with when another set of iconoclasts came in, the Muslims, when the Ottoman Empire. So at this point in time, as they have money, they have been delicately taking that plaster away so we can see the original mosaics. So you can see this is in the 9th century, and it's in the apse, which would be where the altar is. And, so what I would do is just put second Theotokos, in Hagia Sophia, mosaic. You could put the date down, and you could say, put up after iconoclasm. And that would be all you'd have to say in your notes, which, then you can go back and look at it and say, okay, because a lot of times I'll look at my notes and say, what the heck was I writing down here? And then I have to go search for the answer. But by and large, notes taking does make a huge difference, so I highly recommend it. Okay, so then we move to deesis, which is Greek for supplication. Once again, this is in the Hagia Sophia. And so you could call it the supplication or the deesis mosaic. And we have 3 figures in there. Let's go ahead and get, Camille, do you want to go ahead and read this for us?
Sure. Mosaic, the Virgin Mary and John the Baptist follow the Byzantine iconic motif, imploring the intercession of Christ, Pantocrator for humanity on Judgment Day. The most common translation of Pantocrator is Almighty or All-Powerful, and by the 4th century AD, the title generally referred to Christ rather than the Creator. Pantocrator had come to suggest Christ as a mild but stern, all-powerful judge of humanity.
And what's interesting is that when we get to Michelangelo in the Renaissance, he is showing Christ as not a mild and stern, but an angry God. So it's interesting how, as theological interpretations ebbed and flowed, you would get different representations of Christ. So this is also attached to the Hagia Sophia. And so if, for example, they show you a picture of this on the test, you would have to at least know that it was part of the mosaic program at the Hagia Sophia. So when you're doing your studying, just keep in mind that there is more than just pictures of the interior and exterior of the Hagia Sophia that you need to know. Now, it's kind of a bait and switch that the College Board has done. So now we're going to move on to medieval narratives. And we've already talked a little bit about narratives. It's a spoken or written account of connected events and a story. And so why would, in medieval times, would they have narratives, pictorial narratives? Yes, Maya.
Because people couldn't read it.
Most people were illiterate, even women, and especially women. Very few women were, in fact, they really frowned on women learning anything. And so, it was very important to have these pictures that went along with scripture or telling stories. Okay, so just for fun, take about 30 seconds and draw one of these. Just on your notes, wherever. What do you see here? Take a look at what's happening here. We talked a little bit yesterday about interlace and Celtic knots. So just spend about 30 seconds, about a minute, drawing just one element of this. And you folks at home can do the same. Charlotte, you can't be grumbling about drawing. You draw well.
No, I wish I was home too.
Wait, are they like actually at home?
Yeah.
No, well, they actually do most of their studying at home, the online students.
What
Because
do they do during this class? Wait, I'm so-
well, it's called, the students that are taking this class online, it is actually asynchronous, which is a big fancy term for saying the lecture is posted on Classroom, the slides are posted on Classroom, your assignments are posted on Classroom, and then when you have time, you sit down and you watch the lecture and you look at the, slides. So,
Oh, I wanna do that.
yeah, and it takes a lot of discipline, Last year we had a student who didn't do a thing, and then the day of the final, which was a written test that was proctored, meaning that they had to go into their counselor and take it. This girl showed up and wanted to take the test. And I basically told the counselor, at this point in time, she hasn't done any of the work, so she's not passing the class. I don't care if she can pass the final test, which is a sample, practice exam from the AP. You're not going to pass the class just by taking the final test. So, it was rather interesting, but you have to have quite a bit of discipline to do the asynchronous, because it's very easy to say, oh, I'll get to this weekend. And then, someone's going to a concert and has a free ticket and off you go. And all right, so you guys have drawn these. Let's go to the next slide. Have you drawn these? Do you need more time?
No, mine was pretty good.
All right. So we're looking at the fibulae, and a portion of the Gospels. We looked at these yesterday. Based on these stylistic things, who would you say created these? Emma, you're going to be an art historian or something. Who would you say?
Byzantine.
Okay, Byzantine is a good guess, but not true. Think about what we talked about yesterday.
Oh,
Yes, Camille. Celtic. So it would be the Celtic. The official name would be, we have it on the next slide. Saxo-Hibernian. Or another one that's a little bit easier. So because they come from the British Isles, and one way to kind of remind yourself of that is that Celtic knots come from Ireland. And so Ireland is part of the British Isles. And any of the work that was done during a certain period of time in medieval time, particularly when it had to do with manuscript and illumination, and even with jewelry and other things, probably came from England or Britain or one of those adjacent islands. Yes.
Wouldn't Saxo-Iberian though, the Iberian part, wouldn't that include?
I don't know if it's Iberian. I can't remember. So let's go on to the next one.
Because that's the part that throws me, because that's saxophone.
Yeah, so Iberian Peninsula is.
Hiberno. Excuse me. Hiberno. Thank you.
Okay. Because I was like, Iberian is the Iberian Peninsula.
It is. Yes.
Under that.
Yeah.
Well, you guys, this is only the second year I've taught this, so I'm still learning this stuff. I think I could probably take and pass the test, but I'm still learning. And, I'm not trying to use it as an excuse, but the first half of this school year has been tough, dealing with my sister's death, and my brain has gone too much. So, moving right along, style comparison. So we have the Merovingian, looped fibulae, early medieval Europe, mid-6th century, silver gilt, so it's silver and then they gilded it with gold, worked into filigree. So anytime you see jewelry that's got these little tiny wires that make almost looks like lace, that would be filigree, with inlays of garnets and other stones. So this is really quite beautiful, and this was part of a huge Saxon hoard that was found, I'm not sure what century, in England.
Are those used for like the robe thing?
Yes, so those are used to clip a robe in place. So robes, were kind of, you didn't have sewing machines, so a lot of times cloaks and those sort of things had minimal sewing to them. They might just be a big piece of wool that's been woven or whatever, and you wrap it around yourself and then you clip it in place. Then we have the Lindisfarne Gospels, early medieval. There's the word that we were all searching for, including me. Circa 700, illuminated manuscripts. So these manuscripts are put on parchment. You guys saw that video yesterday on making manuscripts, which I found absolutely fascinating. So it's ink, pigment, and gold on vellum. So sometimes vellum and pigment, excuse me, parchment. See, I'm still right there. Mean the same thing. Usually when paper came into existence, they refer to it as paper. But vellum and parchment are usually some sort of animal skin. And the nicest parchment, sadly, they would go ahead and cut tiny lambs out of the mother's womb, or slaughter the lamb, and then take those out and use that skin, because the embryos, or the ones that are about ready to give birth, would give you the nicest vellum or parchment. But that's, yeah. Well, at least we're getting some emotion out of all this art, right? Okay, so here we've got a narrative. We are really truly going to come back and look at that video because it's about the Vienna Genesis. So this was a different culture than the Lindisfarne manuscripts. Anybody want to take a stab at what culture it might be based on the subject matter? We've got Rebecca and Eliezer at the well and Jacob wrestling the angel. Yeah, Peyton.
I know it's kind of off at the bottom, but it's definitely more Byzantine and more, or at least more involved with like more Middle Eastern.
Okay, so think about a culture that was spread all over Europe that venerated the Old Testament, but not the New. Jews. So this is from a Jewish manuscript. And you got some really cool things happening in here. Close-ups, we've got what looks like almost a harlot sitting at the well. We've got this sort of medieval-looking castle, which probably was not there when Rebecca and Eliezer were at the well. You got some nice modeling happening here that are showing 3 dimensions here on the panels, as well as the drapery. And then we have Jacob wrestling with the angel. And we've got some really cool things happening here that showing some naturalism, but not, so it's definitely different than the icons from the Byzantine period. It's Jewish. The other thing that's kind of interesting is they call this purple vellum. Now, it looks pretty orange and reddish to me, but at one time it may have been a lavender. We don't know. So, do you need to go right away on that? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, this is posted online, so the information is still yours to responsibility to learn. So then we have the Lindisfarne Gospels. So we have the St. Matthew. So this would be the beginning of the book of Matthew in this gospel. And it's a cross carpet page. Somebody wants to look up cross carpet. That would be awesome. We've got the St. Luke that page. Incipit means to it begins. So this is the beginning. So there may have been a cross carpet page that might have been over here that probably matched this style. And then we have St. Luke portrait page. So you've got Greek and Latin there. This is all part of the insular. You can see we've got all this interlacing happening. So when in doubt, and you see all of these lines that kind of are laying on top of other lines, of course, then you get to Islamic art, but we'll get to that later. So, as you saw yesterday on the video about manuscripts, these things were beautifully done. tiny, tiny brushes. They had to make their pigments, they had to make their brushes, and then the gold leaf, you know, somebody would have to pound that gold until it was paper thin. And then they would use, you know, gum arabic or some other sticky surface. So illumination always means decorated. There are plenty of manuscripts out there, but they're not that interesting to art historians because they're just manuscripts. Once you illuminate them or start creating illustrations to go with it, then art historians get excited. So important to understand the difference in these because we're moving on to yet more manuscripts. Another Jewish one. Notice this is done in Spain, 1320. So obviously a lot newer than the one we just saw. And Plagues of Egypt, Scenes of Liberation, and Preparation for Passover. These are the pages they want you to know. It's an illuminated manuscript, so it's pigments on vellum. I don't know that there is a whole lot of gold on it, excuse me, with golden haggadah. It would, so possibly this is gold. So this is another narrative or illuminated manuscript that College Board wants you to know about. And, you know, it's very interesting to see how they portray these various plagues that are happening. In fact, we have a close-up of that in the next slide. Here we have the plague of the lice. This is a little lice. And then the plague of frogs. So those of you who... Huh? Well, in the Bible, they talk about how in order for the Israelites to be able to leave, in other words, exit, that's why they have a book in the Old Testament called Exodus, is that there were various plagues that were brought on the Egyptians before the Pharaoh would finally let the people of Israel leave, who had been slaves. So if you haven't ever heard this story before, it is actually very interesting, and you can find it, you know, abridged or abbreviated, and it's very interesting, you know, and some people have come up with some very interesting ideas on how a natural phenomenon could take place that would, you know, of course the Jews believe that God brought this down on them. However, some people say, well, you know, there was an unusually, you know, early spring or lots more water and so a lot more frogs, you know, for the Nile turning red with blood. They have, you know, scientific ideas of that happened. Yes.
One cool thing is, I know they found that they were able to go by like basically points that they point out in the Bible of like kind of where they crossed.
Mm-hmm.
And so there actually are some monuments in place. Well, they haven't done like there wasn't a whole lot of exploration done in that like part of the sea, but this like one that like these divers that just decided to go down and they were just like, you know, just doing fun diving. Mm-hmm. And they found in like the area in between, there's basically like remnants of a whole like army of Egyptian, and it actually dates back to that time. But they found like horse skeletons and human skeletons and like chariots, and
so it's interesting, you know, for those of us who, you know, have beliefs that are based on this. You know, there's a lot of belief that, you know, I feel that God probably allowed these things to happen. You know, there are natural reasons for them. But back to what's happening here, because this is done in the 1200s. I believe it was 1200s, wasn't it? Let's just go back. 1300s. Everybody's wearing more medieval clothing with maybe some attempts to nod to cloaks and that sort of thing. But, you know, a lot of the things, you know, in Egypt, they probably didn't have, you know, this sort of Romanesque like, you know, cabinet or something. Yes. Because the plagues did not affect the Jews, just affect the Egyptians. So, you know, those of you who have this as a snapshot, you know, it might be a good idea to dig a little deeper and, you know, talk about some of these. So now we move on to something that's called the Morales Bible. And here we've got the dedication page with Blanche of Castile and King Louis IX of France, and scenes from the Apocalypse, which would be from Revelation. And it's what's called the Bible Moralese. Gothic Europe, 12, so it'd be 13th century. So it's an illuminated manuscript, ink, temper, and gold leaf. This thing is lavish. It is beautiful. There are videos online you can go see, and you can just see it just glinting. And it's beautifully done. So we have a dedication page here, because I believe Blanche of Castile and King Louis went ahead and commissioned this. And then, of course, here's the actual stories that are told. And with the Moralese Bible, they're basically trying to teach, the moral of the story. And that's one way to remember what kind of Bibles these are. So instead of quoting actual scripture, they may go ahead and illustrate what's going on. And then in the lettering, they actually tell a story and then, compare it to their modern day times and say, so see, we need to learn from this so that we don't, have the apocalypse happen to us, or so on and so forth. So it's important to know what a Bible, Moralese, is that how you say it? Moralese. My French is terrible. I apologize for that. So just a point to make is the Rockman Pieta is actually German. Some of you put down that it was Spain on the blog. It wasn't made in Spain. I actually went and looked to make sure I wasn't not misquoting. There's my lovely phone again. So now we come to a very interesting narrative. Who has the Bayeux Tapestry? This is a fun one. So we're going to look at some of these videos when we get done, and the people at home will have to look at it on their own. So as we said yesterday, it is actually an embroidery. It's not a tapestry. Tapestry technically is like a rug where you've got these little pieces of yarn that stick up and the different colors make a design, but it's usually, it can be on the wall and it can be on the ground, but it's more of a woven thing, whereas this is actually embroidered. So it's linen, and then I believe the thread may also be linen or cotton. And you can just see on that on the far left how long that is. And then we come to another narrative, which is getting into kind of the pre-Renaissance. And this is in the Arena or Scrovegni Chapel, and it has a lamentation in it. But Padua, Italy. They don't know who the architect was who designed the actual chapel, but would you know that Giotto went ahead and painted this? And so it's a fresco with brick architecture, and we've already talked about fresco. Anybody remember what fresco is? Camille.
It's paint on wet plaster.
Okay, paint on wet plaster. Excellent. So we have, a couple of scenes from Christ's life. So the lamentation, it's important to look at that piece of paper I gave you guys, or both pages, about the various things, the various titles I give for different parts of the Bible. So what we looked at yesterday with the Rot Yun and the Mike Pietas was a type of lamentation, because Christ is dead and they are lamenting over him. So it's important to, understand that there are a bunch of scenes in this chapel that were painted by Giotto, but these are the ones that the College Board wants you to know. So it's good to know that there is lamentation. We know what lamentation is. So now we come to the fun part. After we get done looking at the videos, you guys will divide up into group and choose two narratives, so you're going to be comparing them. And then also contextual information. And then you need to write, as a group, 3 higher order discussion questions about each of the narratives. Higher order meaning a little more complex than what color was the sky in Giotto's, lamentation. So let's go ahead. I'm going to turn off the camera, and then we're going to look at these videos, and then we'll come back to this. So we'll say goodbye to